guess is that some infectious agent is causing...
There's an epidemic, a disease that's a killer.
This probably means they are dealing with some new, deadly, sexually transmitted disease. One of the most frightening medical mysteries of modern times.
The man with the most publicized case of AIDS, Rock Hudson, flew home from Paris today on a chartered 747 jet. Hudson's 6'4"
Hudson returned to Los Angeles and was immediately flown to UCLA Medical Center. It was there that Hudson learned he has AIDS.
It took Rock Hudson's death to capture America's attention. By that time, AIDS had already killed 15,000 other Americans. Rock Hudson is the most famous name in a giant quilt, a memorial to tens of thousands of men, women, and children who came along very different roads to the same fate.
Ron Winters, Wayne Field,
David
Ray Wright Jr.,
Rand
Paul
Bazimkowski,
Edward Richards,
Fred, Andy,
Billy,
Bob,
Juan Jimenez,
David,
Bob Flood, David J. Dodd.
He hated the stereotype that the heterosexual world had towards the gay community. And it wasn't true. And he was a perfect living soul to prove that. He is was a very competitive man. And it hit a great note in my heart because I'm a very competitive woman. He was the 6th greatest athlete in the world in the decathlon. He placed 6th. What, 31, 32 when he was doing this? He was incredible. But he was out to prove something. We'd go down and we'd play racquetball. I'd teach him how to play. And he said, no problem. I am a top-notch athlete. It is nothing for me to pick up anything. I am great and wonderful at everything I do. I go, ha, we'll see. My biggest pleasure was to be whipping him around that court. And every time he would be diving for a ball and crash into a wall with sweat pouring out, I would almost fall down laughing. I said, you're not in shape, Tom.
You gotta be a special lady. You got me sitting on top of the world. Every time I hear that song, I think about him. It's what he made me feel like a special person. I've always been involved in the church. It was very important to me to have a stable relationship and a commitment. And in the middle of talking, he says, well, I'll marry you. You know, that's no problem. I said, now, did I ask him or did he ask me? It was always crazy about how it actually happened. 3 months after we married, you could tell there was something bothering him, and he said he wanted to talk to me. And he told me he was on drugs and that he had been trying to get off, and he was having a heart problem with trying to straighten up. And he said to me at the time, he said, if you want to be out of this relationship, I understand, because I don't want to pull you down through that. Of course, I thought about it, we prayed about it. In the prayer, I said, well, you know, we took vows and it was for better or worse. And I said to him, I said, okay, we said better or worse, but this shit is gonna get better.
It was a going-away party. We were talking to a bunch of people, and one of our favorite movies was Two for the Road with Albert Finney and Audrey Hepburn. And there was one scene in Two for the Road towards the end of the film that Jeffrey and I knew by heart, and we did it. Both parts. I forget who did which one. There was this pause right after we finished, and some guy looked at us and he said, I was genuinely moved. And Jeffrey like burst out laughing. And I remember after that, for years, every time we would see something in the movies that was either funny or charming or something, Jeffrey would say, I was genuinely moved. He was the kind of a person I was when I was a teenager, but he still had that sort of childlike teenage innocence. Jeffrey had favorite movie stars, and his favorites turned out in many cases, you know, to be my favorites.
Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come?
Remember the Wedding was probably his favorite film.
My heart be lonely.
I think it was because he identified so much with the character of Frankie Adams, who was played by Julie Harris. Frankie felt like she didn't belong. I think Jeffrey identified as a person who didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. You know how they used to say that there are some people who are too gentle to live among wolves? That was Jeffrey.
This is Marcia Pally for Our Time. We're at the Chelsea Gay Street Fair. It's a beautiful afternoon. We have just about everything here today. Gay atheists, gay Lutherans, old people, young people. How do you feel about the gay community today?
Oh, it makes me very nervous. But then again, most things do.
I don't have any concept of what happens to us when we die. In my son's case, knowing David, I believe he's up there, right alongside the big man, making suggestions and changes and saying, well, God, if you do it this way, maybe, just maybe, things will work out a little better.
David was full speed ahead. Everything about him was a forward motion. Sometimes I would just look at him and marvel at him, because watching him was like watching someone actually eat life. And in the back of my mind, I thought, he's my little life eater. He really knows how to extract the most. He was a very strong child, physically. You know. Hated baths. So when I would hold him in his little tub, I would have to grasp him very firmly or he was off and running. And the doctor noticed bruises on his upper chest and upper arms, much as you would take hold of a child if you were going to shake him, and asked that we put David into the hospital to see if he was an easy bruiser or if he was being battered. When they ran the test, they discovered not only was he an easy bruiser, he was, in fact, a classic severe hemophiliac.
If you were in the Navy, you had to have a wife that was part of the Navy career. I spent 18 years with my ex-wife and had a decent relationship, I think, with her, but I only spent 5 years with David, and they were probably the happiest 5 years of my life. But at the time that we met, I was taken aback with his looks. Of course, that's always a good place to start. And he admitted to me later that he was taken aback by my Rolex. Neither one of us was particularly enthralled with the fact that we turned out to be gay. David had had a hang-up ever since his teenage years with the fact that he was probably gay, and he would have become an interior designer if it weren't for the great stigma attached to that occupation, and therefore decided to become a landscape architect instead, and was doing quite well in his landscape architecture business.
Many of us believe that it may be infectious, that it may be a new mutant type of virus, a cytomegalovirus that has mutated and it is spreading through these individuals, suppressing their immune system and setting them up for these events. But that's just a theory at this period of time.
I don't know how I got it. I fit the profile of kind of the typical CAPS patient in my age and that I am gay, but I don't know how I got it.
So far, doctors have only documented 60 known cases among gay men, so it is by no means an epidemic. They are concerned that it is attacking heavily in the gay community, and they're working on theories to explain why. In San Francisco, Linda Yee, News Center 4.
Do we know for certain what causes it?
No.
Do we even know whether it's a virus, bacteria, or what?
There are a lot of theories, but at this point, we know nothing for certain.
Do we know how it spreads?
No.
Now, if we don't know how to cure it, it must be spreading like wildfire.
Yes, they're growing at an exponential rate.
Among the victims is Bobby Campbell. The San Francisco resident describes himself as the AIDS poster boy.
For me personally, I've had fungal infections, I've had warts, I've had stomatitis, which is an infection of the mouth, so serious that I would not be able to eat, would not be able to talk, and I have cancer.
Bobby Campbell was the 16th person in San Francisco to be diagnosed with this mysterious disease. A nurse himself, he understood the importance of getting out the warning about this new health danger. But despite the efforts of those like Bobby Campbell, to most people, AIDS remained a very distant sort of threat.
For years, I've been wanting to have a child, and I've been in discussion with several other gentlemen about having a baby and just trying to be picky and with who and what involvement. And Tom founded the Gay Games, and I became a member of the board. We were both gay. We became best friends. And when I thought about it, I thought there could be no better man. So I decided to take the chance and see if Tom liked children, number one, and then start with that, and which is what we did on the bridge coming back home. We were in his little Alfa Romeo. I said, "How do you feel about kids?" And he went, "Oh," and he's driving. He says, "I love kids. I've always wanted to have a child." I said, "Tom, how would you like to have a child with me? You're wonderful. You're athletic. You're smart. You're a doctor. My mother would have no complaint. Everything a Jewish mama would ever want for a husband." And he says, "You're kidding." I go, "No." And he starts turning, and that's when the car is right on the bridge. I said, "Wait a minute. Look at the road." He was just so happy. If you would have seen his face, and that warm, sensitive man, he was everything that I would want for my child to grow up with. And that moment, I felt this would be truly a little all-American family. Well, this was a community event. I mean, everybody's been waiting for this child, especially Tom and I. And the baby comes out, 1, 2, 3, and I hear the crying, and it was what a moment. And all I know is here's Tom, he's looking at the baby, and they're all just surrounding this little baby. He says, "It's a boy!" I just remember my doctor looking at her and says, "Dr. Tom, this is a girl. You just looked at the umbilical cord." And I just laughed. I thought it was a little Nathan. And there went little Jessica.
There were many times I would be asleep at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and little guy would come to the side of my bed and shake me. And I'd try to open my eyes and be civilized. And he'd say, "Mom, I gotta bleed." So we would grope our way to the kitchen, and I would set up for what is called an infusion. And you just hope to hell you get that needle in the vein the first go. And it's always a question, How many times do I have to stick him before I get it in? And please, God, let me not increase his pain. After the actual infusion was over, it was not easy for him to sleep. He would get bleeds in his ankles, and the joint would swell. So painful that he could not even bear the weight of a sheet on that joint. He would approach me with a request, like, can we take the training wheels off my bike? So he has to realize and accept, I may have to pay the price. I may have a bleed. I may end up with an infusion. I may end up with a joint that's hurting.
I felt it was important for David to have as much freedom and abilities of his own without us interfering and putting restrictions on him so that he could have a normal life. I think it was very important to David in his mind to be as normal as possible.
He went through programs, he went through detox, and he did well for a little while, and then he'd slip. When you're going through it, it's painful. When you look at it back, you think of how much worse it could have been. I mean, his caringness protected me. You know, he didn't let me hurt. He didn't take my furniture out of my house. He didn't rob me. He didn't rob anybody, you know. The only person he ever hurt was himself. And it was a struggle for 5 years until after our daughter was born. Rob wanted to be the best father that he could, and he was just so nurturing and caring about his daughter. He bathed her, he washed her, he took her for walks, he rolled in the stroller. He changed diapers, that wasn't a problem. I don't like diapers, he didn't mind it. And she was so attached to him, her daddy this, her daddy that. I think that's when he realized he had to change. I felt great when he was drug-free. I was so proud of him. And when he was drug-free, I said, all the bad stuff was going past and all the good stuff could then start, you know, not just the love, but the building.
The disease called AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, sounds less than deadly, more like a diet pill. AIDS has struck only a reported 1,500 people, but it has killed almost 600 of them, and as yet no one with AIDS has been cured.
Puzzling new disease has appeared the past couple of years that is spreading rapidly among homosexuals, and it is a disease that is fatal.
From an epidemic point of view, there have been more deaths from Kaposi sarcoma and pneumocystis pneumonia than have occurred with all the cases of toxic shock syndrome and the Philadelphia outbreak of Legionnaire's disease combined.
In this disease, many people feel lies the secret to what causes cancer in general. Why is the NIH dragging its heels so?
You are raising the possibility that people are dismissing it because it strikes mostly the gay community?
There is no question in my mind. If this were happening to you and the white, straight, middle-class community, it would have been attended to a long time ago.
Congress wants to know what to do about AIDS. Victims of the disease say the government has done nothing and has no plan to. Committee members were told that victims are often gay men or IV drug users, groups already discriminated against. This witness, a victim from San Francisco.
This is not a political issue. This is a health issue. This is not a gay issue. This is a human issue. And I came here today in the hope that my epitaph would not read that I died of red tape.
In just 2 years, the number of AIDS cases was nearly doubling every 6 months. The government declared AIDS its #1 health priority. Yet of the $3.8 billion spent on health research in America, less than 1% went to this epidemic.
For the better part of the month of October, he was feeling pretty lousy. I tried to get him to eat his dinner, and he couldn't, and he went upstairs and went to bed about 8:30, 9 o'clock, and was feeling very miserable, and I called his doctor at home and told him that I was even more concerned than I had ever been. And so he told me to have him admitted to the emergency room right away. And he walked in and, of course, never came out. David died at 4:30 in the morning of 19 November, and I was required to be at my desk at the Pentagon at 8 o'clock in uniform, ready to work. Looking like a prim and proper naval officer, having just lost one of the most important people in my life. Although the Navy thought that I was carrying on Navy business, most of that day I was on the telephone talking to funeral directors and cemeteries and planned the funeral.
This was not going to happen to me. You know, it was like 3 or 4 years all this was going on, and it didn't reach me in a scary sense until it became clear that anybody could get AIDS. I mean, suddenly I was knowing a dozen people who were sick instead of 2. Suddenly there were 30 people who were sick instead of 4. And it hit you like an overwhelming wave of water. I mean, suddenly cold water was thrown in your face. Everybody was dying.
Any gay male who got a cold automatically got scared to death. They've got AIDS. So here, I'm seeing the same thing. He's got a cold. He says, oh, great. Now you think you've got AIDS. Join the rest of the crowd. You know, I just thought, how crazy. You know, I wouldn't even let it into my head.
I remembered reading an article about a baby in San Francisco who had died, and they had traced it back to the blood transfusion it had received. And the alarm started going off in the back of my mind, knowing that my son used immense amounts of blood factor. And you start getting more and more scared as there are more and more stories.
The American Red Cross is recalling vials of a blood product used by hemophiliacs. The product was made with blood plasma from a donor who had AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, and the Red Cross is now trying to avert a new scare.
All this because one man gave 1 pint of blood at an undisclosed Red Cross center last year. This spring, he was diagnosed as having AIDS, and he died in May.
You just stand there because what choice do you have? Do I continue to allow him to live by using the blood product? Or do I risk him even more? He may not get AIDS if I deny him that blood product, but what else, what other kinds of injuries could he get because I don't give him that which he needs? And you go the only way you think best. I want him to live as well as he can now.
He said, this is inside my body, I know it. I'm so scared. And I should have listened, but I didn't. Because Jeffrey was always complaining about something. He fell and he broke his wrist that week. He had the flu. He was feeling like shit. Until he got so sick that he collapsed outside the doctor's office. I remember I took a 6 o'clock flight from Newark and I went directly to Children's Hospital, which is where he was. And the first thing I saw was a nurse outside of Jeffrey's room putting up signs which were precautions for bodily fluids and blood. And of course, I mean, that's it, you know? And I remember running into the room. I pushed the door open. And he was sitting in the bed, and he looked at me and he said, honey, did you hear? And I didn't have to hear. You know, I just knew because of the signs they were putting up outside his door. And I sat on the bed and I told him that we were gonna do this together. That this was, you know, it's gonna be all right. I wanted so much to convince him that I knew immediately, just from what I knew in the community, that if he didn't fight, he would die. And the doctor told me that, you know, he was gonna die. I mean, this was it. And I told him that I was gonna move to San Francisco, that I would leave my job and I would close my apartment and that I would be there and I would take care of him. And he said, do you realize the commitment you're making? Because he knew me. And I said yes, and I did. You know, I knew it was not going to be easy, and it was not easy.
He was a very active man. He was always on the go. If he didn't have anything to do, he'd walk around the neighborhood. He just was not the type of person that would sit out and watch TV, for instance. And he didn't have any energy. The only thing we kept telling him was he had some sort of virus. He had a viral infection. Nothing was taking the fever away, and nothing was making him better. We didn't know what it meant. We just knew it meant something bad, because at the time, he came in and he said, the nurse said, well, people don't live with 40 T cells. You got to be dead already. And he said, it made a point with him, because he kept saying, well, I'm supposed to be dead already. I'm supposed to be dead already.
They test him for everything. Nope, come up negative, everything negative. He was not satisfied. He just wasn't. I said, Tom, it's as if you're looking to have, what is going on? I remember this one day, he turned and was walking away from me here. And I really did see that he's been losing weight. This is the muscular, strong, healthy, vibrant Tom. For the first time, I said, could it be possible? I mean, could it be possible?
My dear child, tonight when I was brushing my teeth, I noted some white patches on my tongue. Sweetheart, I hope it's nothing, but there's a possibility that this is an early sign of AIDS. The horror I feel and the fear of leaving you before you ever really know me is my greatest concern.
Back now at 7:17 with a question. Is the deadly disease AIDS now a health threat to the general population?
The government today tried to reassure people that there's no evidence AIDS is breaking out into the general population. Assistant Secretary for Health, Edward Brandt.
What's important is that there is no reason for panic among the general public.
You know, I'll never forget reading Life magazine when they said, we should all pay attention to AIDS now, because now this disease is beginning to strike the rest of us. And I thought, am I not the one holding this magazine in my hand? It took 3 or 4 years before the press picked it up, and only when it became clear that it might enter the heterosexual population.
Gay men continued to be hit hardest, accounting for 3 out of every 4 Americans with AIDS. In major cities, gay men and their supporters marched to call attention to the government's failure to respond.
Demand state and federal funding. Demand it. We must go through this together. Our greatest asset has been the strength in our unity. This is a fight for all of our lives. Thank you.
Most people still thought AIDS was a disease only of gay men. But more and more heterosexual men and women and children were turning up with the symptoms. AIDS would soon become the leading cause of death for hemophiliacs.
When he was, I think, 7, we had a friend of the family who passed away from AIDS. This was a young man in his mid-20s who had hemophilia. And the day that we got the news that day that Steve had passed away, David and I did a lot of hugging that day, just wanting to touch each other a lot. But that night, when I put him to bed, and as I was tucking him in, he looked up at me and he said, I'm going to die of AIDS too, aren't I? And I have this sense in the back of my mind that from then on, David was getting ready to die.
Tom's worst fear and nightmare was, God forbid, in case he would have given it, or passed it on to us, meaning Jessica and myself. And I went and got tested. There's something to that weight that really can drive you crazy. I mean, it makes you crazy if you weren't before. And we get there. I remember getting in, the counselor, the person that tells you, we get in. He says, well, I'll get to the point. I go, please do. He says, you're negative. Absolutely. I said, you sure? Check the numbers. You're negative. I just jumped for joy. I remember rushing home and telling Tom, and he was so excited. Thank God. The only thing it didn't do was take away the fact that he still had AIDS.
I remember noticing that there was a dark spot on the back of my knee, like inside the hollow behind. And I noticed it, you know, I think most people did by accident. You know, I just looked and there it was. And I couldn't lie to myself. I wasn't, because I was more sophisticated about this disease than I think the average person, and I knew immediately what I was seeing. And of course you hope that it's not. I mean, everybody does. But I immediately made an appointment to see my doctor in New York. The phone rang, and it was my doctor in New York, and he said, I can't believe this, but the biopsy came back negative. It was a mole. And it was incredible. I mean, just incredible to hear this news, that in fact it was not KS. And 2 days passed, and again, the phone rang at the AIDS Foundation. Is my doctor, and he said, I will never, ever be able to make this up to you. He said, I don't know how to tell you this, but the lab switched your slide with the slide of an 86-year-old heterosexual woman who has gotten a KS diagnosis, which is not possible. So I'm sorry to tell you this, but it turns out it's positive after all, and you do have KS. And at that point, I sort of felt like, you know, Susan Haywood and I Want to Live, you know, with the governor giving her a pardon every 5 minutes and then the phone ringing. It just drives you nuts. You know, the stress was enormous. I was at the end of my emotional rope. And this was the final verdict. The final verdict was that I had AIDS.
This taped concert aired on cable systems last month. Predictably, it did not receive rave reviews from the gay community. In protest, this record store in San Francisco's Castro district will no longer stock Eddie Murphy tapes and records. Murphy's manager says he's not anti-gay, but anti-AIDS.
The gay plague, as AIDS has been called, is the center of a political storm. The moral majority claiming AIDS is God's punishment for the gay lifestyle.
All this media attention and sympathy for these AIDS victims just really bothers me. Let's call a spade a spade. AIDS is a venereal disease, and the vast majority of its victims are a group of abnormal people with a very strange and unusual lifestyle.
Cleve Jones and Mark Ostfield are homosexual, both victims of an increase in anti-gay violence that many contend is being fueled by fear of AIDS. That's what happened to Charles Howard, a 23-year-old homosexual from Bangor, Maine. He was attacked, pushed over a bridge, and drowned.
Parents were afraid 3 brothers, Ricky, Robert, and Randy Ray, all hemophiliacs, would spread the AIDS virus they got from blood products.
The Rays left Arcadia after their home burned in a suspicious fire. But the year-old...
Seeing what happened to the Ray family, he just voiced, you know, can this happen to us, Daddy? And I told him, I says, I don't know. I can't answer that, honestly. I can't give you an honest answer. And he was asked by a reporter one time how he felt about AIDS.
We have the right to do everything that everyone else does. We have the right to run around and play. We have the right to go inside someplace without having to fear or shame that, oh, I have AIDS, oh, I might give it to someone. Because that's what I felt for a while before I really realized anything. I felt, oh God, what if I did give it to someone? Oh, what could happen? And it was really starting to scare me.
Dave and I talked about letting people know whether he had AIDS or not. I read an article that there was a lotion being sold in Arcadia, strawberry scented, and you could rub it on your children's skin and it would protect you from AIDS. And the people were buying it. And all of a sudden, I just couldn't trust anybody to behave responsibly, to make the effort of finding out what AIDS was all about.
We didn't come from a different planet. We're still the same human beings that they are. We just have a little difference in ourselves. And I don't see why anyone should put some person down for that.
The word just spread so fast. But I remember I called everyone up, all in Los Angeles, and I said, I want to meet everyone at my sister's house. And I will have something I have to tell everyone. I told them that Tom had AIDS. And their first things, don't go near him. Don't let Jessica near him. It's like, you catch it in a tear. It's just the education of what they knew. I didn't know all that much more. And of course, being in Los Angeles, they're reading about Rock Hudson and everyone else. And now it struck the family. It was very sad. And what I told them is that I wanted the respect and I wanted Tom treated just like anyone else. This is the situation. He's going to be dying. I want to make sure people are there. And the biggest thing is that whatever the services, and at the time we hadn't discussed it, it was enough. The last thing I wanted to discuss was services, but if there was a funeral, that I expected every single one of them to be there. And if I didn't get that love and support, and I'm very close with my family, and I truly meant it, that if there was one person that backed off, that they'll never see myself or Jessica again.
Must take the responsibility for keeping AIDS out of our lives.
Last month, the federal government began a formal AIDS education campaign with the release of these and other public service announcements. The U.S. was one of the last developed nations in the world to undertake an AIDS education campaign, and critics say the ads still do not contain enough specific information. The critics point out that the president did not mention the word AIDS in public until he was asked about it in September 1985. Bauer says it was not necessary for the president to talk about AIDS before then.
When it became clear that the disease was going to be a much more major challenge than anyone thought, the president then, I think appropriately, decided to speak out and has done that repeatedly and will do so again in the next 14 months.
Mr. Reagan said prevention is better than a cure. He sided with his education secretary, William Bennett, and other conservatives who say that the government should not provide sex education to children. The Surgeon General disagrees strongly.
We can no longer afford to sidestep frank, open discussions about sexual practices, heterosexual and homosexual.
I don't quarrel with that, but I think that abstinence has been lacking in much of the education.
That angers some critics.
Until the Reagan administration realizes that the government's responsibility is saving lives and not saving souls, we will continue to see the virus spread through our society.
In the 7th year, the national debate over how to confront the epidemic had finally begun. But for those who already had the virus, the years of denial and neglect continued to take their toll.
He didn't want to be in the hospital. He wanted to die at home. And if that's what his wish is, that's what we accommodated. There was nothing now to do except set up. At least we know that he's going to die, so now what do we do to make the most of our daughter? He saw Jessica every day. It was unlimited. That was just a delight for him. He just couldn't get enough of Jessica. It was hard. So sweet.
Robert started getting ill, I guess, 2 years to 18 months before he died. People from Narcotics Anonymous would call him, people he had sponsored, people he had become friends with who were struggling to get off drugs. And during the time when he could no longer go to the meetings, he'd lay in the bed and get phone calls, and he'd be on the phone for hours saying, yeah, man, I know how that is, but if you do this, it'll work. And he'd be encouraging them from his bed, but you could tell as soon as he hung up the phone, he had no energy anymore. And it would make me mad. I'd get so angry with him. How could he take all of this time with these people in this struggle? And I got selfish about his time.
We went in different directions in terms of dealing with our illness. And I think that each direction was exactly in tune with our individual personalities. I immediately got angry and began to learn everything I could about the disease. Jeffrey, on the other hand, did what Jeffrey always did. His personality was to retreat into his own world and to try things that offered easy hope. He got into a lot of mystical things. He stopped taking his medicine and started like having the color blue around the house. The color blue is a healing color. Figure that out, right? But he believed, and I thought, all right, maybe his belief system will carry him through. I had eternal hope, but at the same time, I was aware on some level that I was losing him completely. He was just in another world. I would come home and he would be lying on the sofa staring at the ceiling in a dark room, and that became the end of his life in a lot of ways. He just checked out.
He had wasted. I mean, the last time I took him to the hospital, he was literally, I could pick him up in my arms and carry him. And when we went to the hospital, he said to me, I can't make atonement for everything I put you through. I said, atone? I said, you atone to God. You don't atone to your wife. You make atonement to your creator, the person who created you, not me. That's when I realized how close it was for him. He said, from this point on, it's going to be fast. He said, I don't want to die at home because you and the kid is there. He just totally gave up, and the spirit of the person that was there changed. The last time I saw Rob, I went and stood by the door of his room. But I had told the nurse how badly I was feeling. So she took my temperature, and it was 105. And I said, well, I can't even go see Rob. She said, no, I think you should, stay away since. So I just went to the door and I looked. And he never turned around. He just, just was laying there like in a fetal position. And that's the last time I saw him. I remember standing at the door for a few minutes and just looking at him, wanting to go in real bad, and deciding, no, it'd be best I didn't go in. And the next morning, my sister-in-law came, and they had called her that he had passed. So I didn't get to say goodbye. I just got to sit and look at him from afar.
When I was diagnosed a year ago with AIDS, I didn't shed a single tear. And of course, most people, I think, when they first diagnosed, it just really blows them away. Well, all of my tears had been shed the year after David died, recognizing that, I was probably doomed. And so when the other shoe finally fell, it was just comforting, I guess, more than anything, to know that where I was headed. I am to be buried next to David in Rock Creek Cemetery. the oldest cemetery in Washington, and in a very beautiful spot.
We were told that he would either be with us at Christmas or he wouldn't. I wanted David to hold on to the magic of his childhood. That was his right. It's the right of every child to hold on as long as they can.
How you doing?
Fine.
Good. You know me, don't you?
Yeah.
I knew one of the greatest things would be if he could visit Alf. David could relate to Alf.
Who do I send the bill to?
He had the soul of a con man. And I think David related to him because not only for his con artistry, but because Alf was different. And I think David always had a sense of his difference from the rest of the world.
Well, David, it was great talking to you.
Okay. I think you're great, Alf.
Well, I think you're great, too. And I'm glad we had a chance to talk. And I want you to think... Huh?
So am I.
And I want you to listen to me. I'm going to tell you something. I want you to think positive thoughts. All right?
I will.
You will. You do that for me.
I
You
will.
be good and think nothing but good things.
Okay.
Okay?
Have a Merry Christmas, Alf.
You too, David. Have a very Merry Christmas.
Okay.
Bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
His last Christmas, we tried to make it as best one as we possibly could. We went out, him and I went out, and it was the first year that I got a Christmas tree early. I guess he basically knew that this was going to be his last Christmas. And he tried to make it as good for us as we tried to make it for him.
Never forget this. I was on the plane from Melbourne to Honolulu. And it's a long flight. It's 12 hours or something. And I was sleeping. The entire cabin was quiet. It was dark. And I woke up the way you sometimes wake up from a dream, but really startled. It was the middle of the night, and I heard a voice. Now I don't know whether I dreamed it or whether I really heard this voice or what, but I heard, you know, Jeffrey always called me V, not Vito. And I heard, V. And I woke up in the cabin, and I remember I was like sort of sweating, and the stewardess came and she said, "Is there something I can do for you?" And I said, "No, I'm all right." And I went back to sleep. And I got to Honolulu in the morning, and Joe Brewer and I went out to lunch at Hamburg and Mary's. And I went home to take a nap. And Joe came into the hotel room about 2 hours later, and he woke me up. And he said, "I got a call from San Francisco. And I have to tell you that Jeffrey got very sick and was taken to San Francisco General Hospital. And this morning, he died." I went directly to San Francisco General. I needed to see him to prove to myself that he was gone. And he was there, and they took this drawer out, and he was covered with a sheet, but only his face was showing. And, you know, to me, it was, of course, it was still Jeff, but it wasn't. No way was Jeff. I mean, he had that little bump on his nose that told me it was Jeff. And I remember I combed his hair, because he was always doing that. You know, he used to just pull back his hair. And I took a comb out of my pocket, and I combed his hair, and I talked to him for a little while.
Watching the heart monitor stop it, the numbers kept coming down, lower and lower and lower. And then finally the nurse saying, "He's gone now." But I watched his chest inflate twice more. Almost as if wanting to get one more lungful of air. And I was there, and I watched his face, and I kept looking for a handle, looking for something to grab to keep him from going. But there was no handle.
I just remember one of the last things he said to her. Because then he died or went into a coma, actually. He started going in and out. I just remember he had this big crystal ball on a pedestal. He says, I have this wizard's ball, and I found it here. A wizard left it. And I want this to be very special. And it'll always bring you good luck and fortune. And it's to always know that Daddy will always be there. And I'll always love you. And she took that. And it was hard for her because she's got her Legos and goes back to the Legos. And instead, here I am crying, taking it all in. And here she is not understanding why he's leaving. And, you know, okay, I heard that you're leaving. Thank you. But she was so sweet. And I see him, and he was in so much pain at that time. He's just trying to see the tears just rolling down. And that was his last time of seeing Jessica. And that was it. And he passed away.
He and I talked about when we first met that we would be soulmates. You know, it's like we would always have that bind that would connect our souls. And I think we will. I really do.
People had heard of the Names Project and asked me, are you making a panel for David? They said, why don't you come down to the Lesbian and Gay Men's Center? Which I gulped. I said, I'll have to ask my husband. And we had not ventured very far out of our little middle America home into that area of the city. But we said, let's go. And we went down there, and we found the room where they were working and met the man that I had spoke to on the phone. And I don't know, it seemed like 5 minutes later, David was very, very busy with helping them out with a mailing, and I was very busy stitching letters onto a person's panel. I was thinking of all the different things I wanted to put on David's panel, satins and bright colors and things that flew, just of all the possibilities of everything that would say to somebody, this was David. And suddenly, for the first time since my son's death, it was okay to laugh, really laugh.
Make sure you look up and go over like to the center more. Here. Yeah. Go to the center. Where's it? Where's that gonna go?
In 1987, in a storefront in San Francisco, friends, families, and lovers began to piece together a quilt. They would soon be joined by tens of thousands of people from across the country, remembering loved ones lost to AIDS.
I'm very proud that he has so many panels because that means that his message got across. The happiest thing that I feel, and I know Jessica will feel as we get older, is I think that we're just proud to have so many people love the same man that we love. After he died, I played some tapes that he had. I was listening to this one tape, and he's talking to Jessica about Mama, and I love Mama, and you've got a wonderful Mama. But I gotta tell you, this one's for Mama. Remember all those times we played racquetball? I let you win. And I was crying. Judy was crying. And I heard that, let me win. How dare you say that you let me win? Even to his dying days, it's like that competitive edge. He knew he still wanted me to remember and to have something.
Well, I entertained making the quilt for a long time. When I first heard about the quilt, I thought about it. I thought it would help to be a healing force. There was so much hurt and pain and guilt and desperation left when you lost somebody to this disease. How there was something to kind of relieve that.
I know. I don't know. Alfred was theatrical, but Robert would.
I had spoken to my mother. She had said to me, "Are you going to get tested?" She said, "Well, if you're positive, I don't want to know it."
Yeah, that's nice.
And I said, "Okay, Mom, I won't tell you." 6 months later, my mother came to me and she said, "Did you ever take that AIDS test?" And I said, "Yeah." Well, what was the answer? What happened? And I said to her, "You told me not to tell you." She said, "Yeah, but I gotta know. I want to know." I said, "Mommy, I'm positive." And she says, "Oh, no." And she did, you could sense the loss in her. She said, "I don't know how I'm going to deal with this." She said, "This is going to kill me. You know, I can't take it." I said, "If it's the Lord's will that I don't make it and I get sick and anything happens, that's His will. So you can't protect me from whatever His will is." And she came through a lot stronger behind that. I've been positive for 2.5 years, and I'm well. And every day I'm prayerful and thankful that I am. In my mind, I've decided I'm not going to get sick. I don't have to get sick. And I'm not going to let worrying about it make me sick. And that's how I've been coping. Now, whether it works or not, time will tell. But I feel great.
In the 48 years that I've been around, I've done more than many, many people do in a full 80 or 85 years on this earth. I've raised a family, had a successful naval career, been around the world many times, and loved and have really no regrets. Not that I wouldn't like to be around another 20 or 25, but I can't think of many things that I've left undone. The panel that I made has my name on it with my rank at Retirement Commander T.E. Torrey. David has a panel there, and I just would like to have one. And I just decided that if I was going to have one, I'd do it myself. Hang in there, buddy, because it won't be long before we're together again. And I truly believe that, and that's been one of the things that's I think, been comforting to me. I do believe in an afterlife, and I just look forward to that.
Everything that I am tells me that nothing happens when you die. It is a state of unconsciousness, and that is it. Now, that's very hard for me to accept. I would like to believe that consciousness is eternal, and that in some form or another, that we exist. I don't think so. Intellectually, I don't buy it. I just think when you're dead, and that's it. You know, and that's why it's so important to do something while you're here. Because this is the only shot you get.
Act up! Fight back! Fight AIDS! Act up!
The government, they've been criminally negligent. The President of the United States didn't say the word AIDS until thousands of people were dead.
We're gonna seize control! We're pissed!
And so I've chosen to spend most of my time educating people, fighting, getting arrested, sitting in the street, blocking traffic, to call attention to this issue.
My name is Vito Russo. I'm a writer from New York City, and I have AIDS, and I'm here today because I don't want to die. I know that there are drugs out there that can save my life, and I want to know why they're not being tested more quickly. I'm here today because I don't want a quilt with my name on it to be in front of the White House next year.
If I live another 10 minutes or another 10 years, that's the way I'm going to spend my time, agitating for change, because change needs to happen. I met a guy in the doctor's office a couple of months ago who told me that all his friends were dead. And it took a couple of seconds for me to sink into what I was hearing. And he was a 32-year-old guy who said, I only have acquaintances now left. And what's even more frightening is that that's not unique. And that you know a lot of people who just have lost all their friends. And that's an experience that I don't think many people have in a lifetime except during war.
The AIDS epidemic in America is showing no signs tonight of slowing down. Federal health officials said today that 400 new AIDS cases now are being diagnosed in this country every week, and there were 20,000 new cases in 1987 alone.
The man who took charge of the Presidential AIDS Commission made it clear that he thought the government had failed to take charge of the AIDS epidemic.
I hope that the power of our recommendation, that this document you have, 270 pages with nearly 600 recommendations, is evidence that the system, for whatever reason, has failed and is not working well, and we better get on it.
Watkins said the problem was not just the AIDS virus.
It is a healthcare system that is woefully overburdened. It is a drug development system that is unresponsive. It is a nation that has a specter of drug abuse hanging all over its head, and we haven't dealt with it well. It's a nation that is, frankly, discriminating against other members of our society.
In the summer of 1989, the number of AIDS cases reported in the United States quietly passed the 100,000 mark. More than 59,000 Americans have died. More Americans than died in the Vietnam War. Worldwide, up to 10 million people have been infected with the virus. One new person is infected every minute, and there is one AIDS death every 30 minutes.
Bill Krause, Bob Greenwood, Richard Anderson, Reggie Hightower, Gary Barnhill, Simon Guzman, Lawrence, Randy Partlow, Stephen Quesada, Felix Velarde Munoz, John Riddler, Paul Walker, Bill Cathcart, Bobby Campbell, and my friend Marvin Feldman.
Jose Ramirez, George Dutra, Scott Oatman, Gemini Jim, Dick Gamble, Todd Coleman, David Thompson, Larry Long, Frank Cook, and my friend Jeffrey Phillips.
Alfonso McFadder, Rosemary, Marisol, Quinetta Gillespie, and the babies that I have loved and cared for, Tony, Langstone, and Connie.
Alan, Bert, Dominic, Martha, Costa Catralis, William Paul Chase, David Wade, Dean McDowell, Bill Benville, Paul Richards, Hank Irons, Para Todos los Niños, my friends Peter Hujar, Tucker Ashworth, Robert Hayes, Antonio Lopez, and Peter Lester.
Wilbur Darley, Daniel Gallagher, Robert Johnstone, James L., my much cherished and loved 11-year-old son, David Lee Mandel, Jr.
And my friends, Susan, Rose, and Tom.
And my beloved son, Gregory Connell.
And my beloved son, Zachary Jacob Freed, 5.5 years old.
And my beloved Jeffrey Sevchik.
Roger Whittaker.
Jeffrey was a perfectionist, and I'm sure he'd hate this panel because I'm not. I'm a big slob, and I sort of put sloppy sequins all over it under his name, and I think he would want those removed.
Steve Miller. Thomas Alex.
You know, sometimes I look at his picture on my desk and I think, where the hell are you? He's got to be somewhere, right? And it's been almost 3 years now since Jeffrey died, and I still, every day, I wonder where he is. For me, the quilt is where Jeff is.
Paco. Raymond. Tanya. Todd. York. Dennis Sutterer.
Our most precious Joel.
John.
Our most beautiful son. John Anthony.
Johnny Boy.
Johnny Boy.
Politano.
Politano. And we love him so much. We love him so much. We hope all parents would understand.
too many people, too many people. Too much love gone, too much tragedy. I took David's story and what his loss meant to me, and I multiplied that by the number of panels, and it was just so horrendous. Every one of those persons that represented by a panel is a person who was loved by somebody. And that loss, a tremendous loss. And I kept thinking of the possibilities for David, what he could have been, what his promise was, and how cut short it was. And again, multiplied that by the number of panels.
I think what we want to see eventually is an end. A day when we can stop adding panels to this quilt and put it away as a symbol of a terrible thing that happened that's now over. You know, we forget that someday this is going to be over. Someday there's going to be no such thing as AIDS, and people will just look back and remember that there was a terrible tragedy that we survived.